So let me just start with the session itself. So, in this session, Professor David Johnson is going to give us a kind of overview about history, culture, and mind. This is something in which he has worked. And the reason I asked him to speak was, our sessions today, especially in the first part of the morning, was about culture. But we also know that Kerala society and young people in Kerala are increasingly globalized. They are exposed to a global culture, and educators struggle with this as to how do we reflect culture in education, and which cultures. I mean, we talked a lot about how there are people from different states in our state, and we need to reflect their cultures. But how about the global culture to which young people are now exposed? Well, this was my broad idea. I'm not sure exactly what David will be talking about, so I'll leave it to him. And I'll introduce him first. He is a reader in comparative and international education at St. Antony's College, University of Oxford. He is also a fellow of the British Psychological Society. His research focuses on culture, learning, and cognition, with particular emphasis on Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. And he has a long list of accomplishments, which I will not go through. Suffice it to say two additional things. I've worked with David in Africa and elsewhere, and it's always been a great pleasure. He's brought a lot of depth and understanding to the issues of learning in different contexts. But I also learned recently, when we met in Oxford recently, I also learned that he had an association with Kerala, and he has visited Kerala right at the beginning of his career. But I was also told more recently, in I think it was 2015, and there is somebody here in the audience who has associated with you at the SCRT. So there you are. It's a small world. So over to you, David. You have about half an hour, and then we'll take some questions. And we'll
thank you.
It's from here when you tell us to.
Hi, thank you, Sujita, and greetings to all. I wish I was in Kerala. I miss it dearly. I've had some wonderful engagements with colleagues there, and have learned a lot about India from Kerala. I trust you've had a good conference so far. I've looked with interest at the agenda and the papers that were read yesterday and this morning. I don't know how much my paper today will add to what you've discussed. I've tried to organize the paper so that it touches on the themes that you've been talking to, and hope that in some way there's a connection, but you'll tell me, no doubt, at the end of the session. So if we turn to the presentation, I would like to, the objective really is to achieve a few things through the paper. It's really a brief introduction to a school of thought that I've been working with and in for many years now. And the theme or topic for today, if we look at the first slide, if you could just go back to the first slide, please, the heading. The topic today is culture, mind, and history. And I want to look at the relevance of each of these words, and hopefully the implications for language and literacy and cognitive development or learning in Kerala specifically. So if we pop to the next slide. Thank you. So the school of thought that I've been associated with for a very long time, I'm a chartered psychologist, and I've been working within the school of thought, the sociocultural school of thought, which is primarily associated with the work of Lev Vygotsky. And this emphasizes the profound influence of historical, cultural, and social contexts on human cognition and development. So classically and traditionally in psychology or other disciplines, the idea that human learning or cognition or human development was a thing of individual minds has really been challenged. For more than 100 years ago, and certainly through the work of Lev Vygotsky, whose writings were translated into English in the 1930s, so quite late. But the core idea of this school of thought is that learning and psychological development are deeply embedded within social interactions and cultural practices and historical contexts, and these are the elements, these interactions, these historical contexts, current cultural practices, wherever we are, and however we define culture, is ultimately what explains how we think and how we innovate. The focus on history and culture and cognition reveals how human thought processes are shaped by societal influences and collective experiences. So your theme for the conference is a very important and poignant one. We're all aware of rapid changes in society, rapid changes in culture and in social interactions and in societal practices. In Kerala, where you are, what does this ultimately mean for how we learn, for how children learn, for what we need to focus on to understand learning? Which frameworks do we use, and what of these frameworks directs our attention and produces the matrices by which we assess learning? So from the agenda, many of your papers, it seems yesterday, looked at learning outcomes, particularly in reading and in writing, and the role of language, mother tongue or other languages in the shaping, the very important reliance of languages, however they defined in cognition and how we learn. So the paper really wants to focus on these elements of history, culture, and activity, human interaction in societies like Kerala that are, and others elsewhere that face a constant struggle of remaking and reshaping, and what of that allows us or enables us to hold on to the valuable elements of culture and practice as we understand it, and what of that propels us to change. And culture is dynamic, and so are social practices and human interactions. But let's look at the slides before I digress too far from them. So let's look at the next slide, please. Could we click forward, please? So the key principles of sociocultural theory is social interaction as the foundation of learning. So cognitive development, the school of thought argues, occurs through meaningful social interactions. Learning is not merely an individual process, but is shaped by communication and collaboration with more knowledgeable others. For example, parents or teachers, peers. But the second point is equally, if not more important, which is cultural tools and mediators. So cognitive development relies on cultural tools such as language and symbols and technologies which mediate our thinking and problem solving. So one of the fundamental contributions of this school of thought is the idea of mediation and mediational means, or the tools that enable that mediate, that scaffold, that guide our learning, our development, our cognitive process. Language in particular is viewed as a critical tool for both communication and for internal thought. And the third key principle of sociocultural theory is the historical influence on cognition. Vygotsky emphasized that the historical development of human thought, suggesting that intellectual tools evolve over time, influenced by the cultural and historical context of a society. So this is a particularly important point in a changing society. Many years ago, I suspect in India or elsewhere, the artifacts that existed in our society, many of these have changed fundamentally. But I don't know, let's think of how milk, for example, was carted from a dairy farm to a place for pasteurization and for resale. This might have happened, as I think I've seen in certain rural areas in India and elsewhere through South Asia, on a donkey-drawn cart. As a donkey-drawn cart makes its way through a village or a community, shapes and symbols of the cart wheels, how they turn slowly or fast, how they overcome obstacles like rocks or stones or ruts and grooves in the road, will have shaped and inspired thought. These symbols and artifacts, some of them material artifacts, some of them mechanical artifacts, language and certainly other tools in society, shaped our understanding of the events before us. These tools and artifacts allowed us to reason. If a donkey cart was stuck in a rut or couldn't overcome an obstacle on the road, careful human thought, often collective thought, do we push it, do we pull it, do we change the size of the wheels on it, do we change the material that the wheels are made of for materials that more easily overcome obstacles. This relationship between artifacts and tools, I hope is clear to see, is what created for the thinkers like Vygotsky and others in the school of thought a very profound realization that intellectual development, cognition or mind, if you like, has a dialectical relationship with the environment. That as the environment changes or as we encounter obstacles in the environment, we think about how to overcome those obstacles. That process of thought enables us to reshape the environment, to change the environment. So the idea of a dialectical relationship, and indeed the first conceptions of this notion of dialectical materialism, the relationship between human thought and the material environment, was, of course, part of the philosophical thinking of philosophers like Kant or Hegel, and indeed that influenced a lot of Marxist thinking. So Karl Marx spoke of a dialectical and historical and dialectical material processes. These ideas, these philosophical ideas, permeated and infiltrated the work of psychologists like Lev Vygotsky and others. And today, in many educational systems, the profound contribution of Vygotsky and others has helped us to understand learning, how we learn, how we think, how we innovate, etc., and principally through this interaction, this dialectical interaction between historical processes, the material elements in the environment that help us to think about how things work and to change how things work. And that, as I said, dialectical relationship between us and our environments, us and our social interactions, is the bedrock of how we understand learning. So next slide, please. Will we move on to the next slide, please? So what is culture? Culture, as emphasized in the socio-cultural perspective, profoundly influences cognition by shaping the frameworks through which individuals perceive and understand and interact with the world. Different cultures prioritize different cognitive skills based on their values and practices. For example, oral cultures may emphasize memory and storytelling, while literate cultures, or more literate cultures, emphasize analytical reasoning. Language is a core cultural tool and not only facilitates communication, but also structures thought. So again, your emphasis in the seminar, your theme is really, really critical, the focus on language and on culture. The ways in which knowledge is transmitted across cultures. For instance, in societies in the global south, many of them emphasize direct learning within social context, so activity and action. If we move on, please, because I think I'm going to run out of time. So what then about mind or cognition? Cognition from the socio-cultural perspective is not fixed, is not a fixed biologically determined process, but a dynamic outcome that is shaped by social and cultural experiences. I've spoken a little bit about scaffolding and guided participation. Learning is facilitated when more knowledgeable individuals provide temporary support to help learners acquire new skills. This is called scaffolding and is fundamental to cognitive growth. I won't go into too many examples, but there's a wonderful book by cultural anthropologist Lave and Wenger, Etienne Wenger and Barbara Lave, who write 6 simple case studies showing how children in different societies apprentice. In one example, butchers' apprentices learn about weight and measurement and so on by engaging in the cultural practices of a butcher. So they learn to weigh meat and so on. Apprentices in a tailor shop learn from the tailor how to measure up young men or women for birthday suits or other clothes that they wear. Precise measurement. They learn how to cut and sew. And many of these processes are the fundamental skills that are often attempted and taught through the school curriculum: weight, measurement and ratio and perspective and so on. Many children in India and other parts of the world don't do as well, perhaps, when we look at the TIMS studies or the Pearls, as you've looked at, and we wonder why. But these studies from social and cultural anthropologists, which were small-scale studies, show that when young people are situated in a particular context of which the cultural practices and the practicing of these ideas of measurement and weighing and so on and so forth are contained within environments and social interactions that they understand, they excel as much as anyone else. But the modes of assessing that kind of understanding is very different, and I'll come on to that in a minute. I'll also talk a little bit about distributed cognition, which is not confined to the individual mind, but is often distributed across people, across tools, and across environments. For example, mathematical problem solving can be influenced by tools such as abacuses or calculators. But the real example here is by a man who became an anthropologist. He was a naval quartermaster, Hutchings, and he observed how naval ships were brought into the harbor safely. And this isn't the work of one individual, it's the work of several individuals, each of these individuals working with different cultural tools or naval tools, binoculuses, reading of maps and steering equipment, or manning the sails of a particularly large ship, understanding the processes of the wind. But landing the ship safely into harbor is an enormous cognitive feat, the cognition of which is shared across the different minds of different people tasked with different operations in that ship. All of these things, I think, have enormous relevance to societies such as Kerala and elsewhere, in how the point I'm trying to make here is really that we need to think hard about what matrices do we use to try and understand what our children are able to accomplish. If it is the matrices, the classic matrices that we are well aware of and well accustomed to, these matrices test how well individual minds work on problems that are often disassociated from many cultural realities. But a true understanding of human cognition is an understanding of distributed cognition, an understanding of how history and culture mediate our understanding, how different cultural tools and their specificity in specific societies aid our cognition and aid our innovation. And this, I think, is really important. So I'm going to flick through one or two more slides, and Sujita will tell me when to stop. I was going to come on to the important work of Gustav Jahoda. You'll see the photograph there. Jahoda was born in Switzerland and did a lot. He became a cultural psychologist and did quite a lot of his work in amongst Ghanaian people, an enormous contribution to the field of cross-cultural psychology. So next slide. Jahoda's work highlighted the need for cultural sensitivity and culturally sensitive psychological research, and the importance of considering historical and social contexts when studying human development. His research extended into areas such as cognitive development and perception, and the formation of stereotypes, and emphasizing the influence of cultural environments. Next slide. he was particularly interested in how cognitive development varies across cultures. His work emphasized psychological processes such as perception and memory and problem solving. And he argued that these are shaped by cultural contexts rather than being universally fixed. Some of his empirical studies involved African communities where he investigated how children's cognitive abilities develop differently from Western children due to variations in schooling, in linguistic structures, and in cultural practices. And Jahoda critiqued Jean Piaget's stages of theory and cognitive development. So India's primary school and secondary school curriculum, like the UK, like Australia, or other societies, are very influenced by these stages of cognitive development. They're very Piagetian, arguing that cognitive development, that children learn different things at different ages, and that before you turn 12, you aren't really able to decenter or think in ways that are abstract and so on. But Jahoda was very critical of this, as have been many, many scholars over time. But we haven't really shifted the perspective of what is taught and when, and what is important and when, that drives many of the curricula as we understand it in the societies in which we live. Next slide, please. Jahoda also explored how culture affects basic perceptual processes. His research investigated whether perception, a fundamental psychological function, was subject to cultural variability. The importance here is that individuals from different cultures perceive depth or shapes or geometric illusions and others in different ways depending on their cultural exposure to visual art, to environmental structures, and so on and so forth. The last bit of the presentation I wanted to come to was really orality. So if you slip down to if you go to the next slide. The next slide.
The next slide, just 5 more minutes, yeah?
Yeah. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Yeah.
So orality culture. So orality, the reliance on spoken language for communication and cultural expression, plays a central role in cognitive and intellectual life in many countries in the global south. In societies where literacy rates are lower, oral traditions often serve as a primary vehicle for preserving history, sharing knowledge, and shaping cognitive processes. But the relationship between orality and cognition is complex, but perhaps it's worth pausing for us in this seminar and examining some of these. They influence memory and learning patterns and community identity. And next slide, please. So orality has been researched for many decades now. In oral societies, cognition tends to be more contextual and situational, and knowledge is often stored in narratives and proverbs and songs and storytelling rather than in abstract theoretical frameworks. And I think this talks to some of the issues I suspect you've been dealing with in your seminar up to now. How do we account for growth and innovation, for the development of literacy and language in societies that are changing rapidly and moving perhaps from strong oral traditions to very strong written traditions, or other changes make it necessary. Next slide, please. So in many countries of the global south, oral traditions continue to shape how knowledge is transmitted across generations. And this is particularly evident in African societies, indigenous American parts of Asia and the Pacific Islands, where oral histories, folk tales, songs remain central to education and cultural preservation. This is I think, a really important issue that not only Kerala faces, but societies like Bhutan, where I've done some work, as well as some societies in India like Mizoram and others. These are some pretty big questions. Next slide. I think there's just one or two left. You go to the next, please. Okay, was that it? Was there a concluding slide? No? Anyway, that's fine. Thank you very much. I'll rest my presentation there. Okay, I see the slides are back up. Just go to the next slide. So implications for language and literacy in Kerala. The cognitive patterns shaped by orality has profound implications for education in low and middle income countries. Traditional education models imported from literate cultures often fail to account for the strengths and limitations of oral learning environments. Many formal education systems emphasize abstract reasoning and text-based learning, which can sometimes create a disconnect for students from oral cultural backgrounds. For example, children from oral cultures may excel in narrative-based learning, oral storytelling, memory retention, but struggle with decontextualized abstract concepts emphasized in formal schooling. So I think I'll rest the presentation here. The point I want to make is we are in a situation across many societies where more globalized matrices that attempt to impose an understanding of what learning and cognition is, the expectation that all societies abide by these matrices, and that progress and development and learning and innovation and all these things are judged by these matrices. Perhaps this is inevitable. Perhaps this is what we think progress means. Does progress mean a shared understanding of the matrices that define how we think, how well we innovate, etc.? Or do we challenge these matrices? It's hard to challenge them full on, and Sujita will know this better than anyone. The judgments of what these matrices are, what we need to subscribe to, where we need to move our children to, are seen as unquestionable and fundamental. And that may well be the case, but I think there is still a case to be made for those of us who want to continue to think beyond what we see on the reports of these matrices, that children in India, in Kerala, in Ghana, or other parts of the global south are perhaps seen to be less able to abstract, less able to innovate, less able to think, less able to reason. I don't really think that this is true, but I think it's up to us and symposiums and seminars and forums such as these to challenge those concepts while working very hard to ensure that everything we do doesn't take us backwards, but actually takes us forward, perhaps on a pathway, on a slightly sideways pathway that helps us to demonstrate what our children in Kerala and elsewhere are really capable of. All right, many, many thanks, and sorry for overshooting the time.